Hello everyone, my name is Alex. I'm the chair of the Monash Energy Club, and you're about to watch the interview that I did with Kate Tyler, who is the business advisor to the president of Shell America. We discuss the US energy market and how it's built up and what it's made of. We then discuss the oil war between Saudi Arabia and Russia and how this has affected Shell and the oil and gas industry altogether. Before moving on to COVID and how COVID has resulted in negative oil prices, very low oil prices, and what Shell is doing to combat this and what they've had to take on the chin to see themselves get through this. This is the interview that will air before the main event for the Monash Energy Club. So I hope that you can sign up for that and watch the rest of the event live with Graham Bethune from Energy Quest and Guillaume Roger, who is an associate director of the Monash Energy Institute. So I hope you enjoy this and come along to some of our events.
How about we first get an introduction from you? You can tell us a little bit about what you do at Shell, maybe your background, and I guess what's happening now.
Sure. I find it's actually easier to start almost at the very beginning of my life on just why I chose energy. So obviously I'm American and I grew up in the States, but I actually grew up growing up in the National Park Service. So my parents, both of them were park rangers. So I grew up hiking and camping and living in Yosemite National Park. My mom at one point lived in Glacier Bay National Park in Alaska. So I grew up with just a deep appreciation for the environment and the planet, quite frankly. But I also really loved science and math growing up. I always had an affinity towards building big things. And so I actually chose to study civil engineering in university. So I did an undergraduate degree in civil engineering, and then I did a master's degree in civil engineering with an emphasis on structural engineering. Graduated in 2009, and quite frankly, the global economy was actually in a very similar state as it is today. We were in a massive global recession. A lot of people weren't hiring. I ended up applying actually to 65 civil engineering schools or employers that did high-rise buildings because that's what I thought I wanted to do, and no one was hiring. And I got a master's from Georgia Tech. It's a well-known university globally. And I just was kind of in this moment of just, what am I doing? Why is it so difficult? And so I really resonate actually with what you're about to go through as a university student. But so a really close professor of mine asked me, have you ever really considered looking at energy or the oil and gas industry? And just my upbringing, I was like, no, I don't really want to do that. I don't really want to look into it. But I ended up actually interviewing with a company called Atkins that does oil and gas consulting, but they also have a civil arm. And initially I was like, okay, I'll go into oil and gas and then I'll make the jump. But I joined Atkins in the summer of 2009, and I was just blown away by the energy and the oil and gas industry, quite frankly. I had so many preconceived notions, and all of them were wrong. We were doing really innovative stuff. I was doing advanced fire and blast analysis. And I just found a deep sense of purpose with oil and gas and energy specifically on just how it connects to every single human on this planet. I also found that the people in the industry were just extremely intelligent. And I think there's this stereotype of Americans in oil and gas. It's like drill, baby, drill. And it's not really what I found at all.
Especially Texas.
I found a bunch of people. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I ended up just falling kind of in love with the industry and knew that I wasn't going to look back. So then after about 4 years with the company, I jumped to Shell. I still was kind of enamored with building big things and doing, innovative engineering work. And so I joined in their deep water projects organization. And that group builds, deep water floating platforms that are made out of steel, and you do massive construction. I was leading a team at one point in South Korea that was building the hull in one of their shipyards. And so it was a really, really neat opportunity. And so I ended up doing that for about 5 years, leading engineering teams, leading fabrication teams, managing projects. And then about 2 years ago, I wanted to be closer to the business. I wanted to understand how Shell made money, how we take strategic decisions. And so I ended up getting this job, which I'm currently in, which is business advisor, chief of staff to a senior leader. So it's to Gretchen, who you've met. And so Gretchen has kind of two big roles. One, she is the executive vice president for our global shale business. That business has operations in Canada, the United States, and down in Argentina. But she also is president of Shell US, which is, so she protects the entire reputation of our company in the United States. And she also is a big government facing job as well. So I support her in both of those capacities. And I've been in this job for roughly 2 years or so. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think it's somewhat comforting that people know that even if you graduate in a recession, you can still end up being chief of staff to a company like Shell. I guess just as a quick question, would you have any tips on to all the students who are about to graduate into a recession about maybe how they should be resilient or getting that first job, and maybe some tips that you experienced?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, don't give up, honestly. I mean, it can be really hard and draining. And I remember and I actually, at one point, I turned down a job in the recession because I was like, this isn't a fit. It was building bridges in the Northeast, and I just didn't really want to do that. One, don't give up. Keep putting your name out there. But then the other thing too that I was really thankful actually to that professor for suggesting that I even look in a different industry, right? Because I don't think that I would have ever, if actually the economy had been better, I probably would be working for a high-rise building company at this time. And it was kind of this unexpected place that happened out of a kind of bad situation that I would just say look in unexpected places on areas that you might not normally go, because you might actually be surprised.
Okay. Well, we'll jump to energy then. Maybe it'd be useful if you could first provide a little bit of background as to the US energy market, and introduce what shale oil is and how it compares to regular or conventional oil.
Yeah, sure. So specifically around the US.
Yeah, I think it'd be useful.
Yeah, so the US energy market actually looks slightly different from the global energy market. The global energy market, it's, about a third of energy consumption is taken from oil products, and then the next one is coal. What's happened actually in the United States is that, so oil is still the highest in the US, but the next highest is natural gas. And fundamentally that's come from the shale revolution, which is fracking, right? What was found in the shale industry, and particularly in the United States, is just these reserves that you could actually get hydrocarbons out of the ground in a different manner than you would in a conventional oil and gas play. In conventional oil and gas play, it's sort of, I like the analogy of it's a large reservoir that you sort of drill into, and then you produce that reservoir. When you are actually in a shale play, the molecule is actually trapped in sand or in shale rock. And so what you'll do is you'll pump water and sand into the shale in order to expand it, and then you can extract the molecule in a different manner. So rather than sort of like putting a straw in a reservoir, which is an overly simplified analogy, it's just a completely different technology in shale. And fundamentally, the United States is one, we invented it, but then two, like this technology, but two, the reserves in the United States or in North America are the largest in the world.
Oh, okay. So shale is primarily used only in the United States then?
It's primarily actually in North America. So Canada and the US are big ones. But then there are shale positions other places. So in Argentina, there's a big one, which is why we're there. But then there's smaller ones around the world. There's some in Australia, actually. There's some in China, but they're much smaller than in the US or in Canada.
Okay. And you mentioned natural gas is a big energy provider in the United States. In Australia, our energy transition is, I guess, increasingly moving from coal to natural gas. Is that probably a similar direction that's happening in the United States?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
100%. And even in Appalachia or in Pennsylvania, which is a primarily coal region of the United States, there's a big reservoir of natural gas there too. So the shale industry has actually even tapped into that region as well. And that's where also a big shift is happening. So people are just switching from coal to natural gas.
But of course, I think renewable energy is becoming a big thing in the United States. I see some headlines that you're getting X number of days running on renewable energy, and
it is. And actually, I mean, if you look at trajectories of just the energy mix itself, I mean, oil and gas are still number one, but the trajectory and the projection of renewables is in a way that, you know, and I hope eventually takes over oil and natural gas. But fundamentally, actually, those products, though, at least Shell does not see them ever really going away, just because they're so instrumental in just everyday use that we use. But I find a lot of people don't truly understand how instrumental oil and gas is in their life, outside of just where they normally see it in their vehicle or when they're getting on a plane or other areas. So.
Now, the last couple of months have been a bit tricky, to say the least, in the oil and gas industry, and the world, but particularly the oil and gas industry. So as you're saying, shale oil makes up most of the energy demand in the United States, and it seems to be impacted a little bit more than probably some other conventional oil products. Could you provide some background as to why shale oil seems to be getting hit the hardest?
Yeah, sure. I actually, even just this week, actually, I heard a good analogy that shale oil is actually, or shale gas even, is the world's swing barrels, right? So when demand is really, really high in the world for oil and gas products, it's very easy to then get into shale and then ramp up production, get that production to market, and make money off of it. The same is true actually on the opposite side, right? So when there's an oversupply of demand of oil and gas, the swing barrel is the shale barrel. And simply because it's the easiest to turn off from a long-term investment strategy, if that makes sense. So in a conventional play that Shell would do, we would take long-term strategic views of that play. Let's even just take a deep water example, because we're pretty big in deep water in the United States and Shell. What we would do for a deep water play would be almost like a 10-year horizon, right? We would secure a lease in Gulf of Mexico. We would then go and drill an exploration well. We would confirm if there was any sort of product, there was a substantial amount of product. We would then develop and decide to, one, go and build this big platform that we would sanction and do it in potentially in Asia, and then ship it to to Texas to then integrate it. So it's just a very long, drawn out stage gates of investment. Obviously, we have investment hurdles along the way, but making a decision to turn that off financially for a company is just more difficult. When things are really bad, like they are now, just with COVID, in shale, right? Like you're drilling a number of wells every few months, and so it's easier to take a pause. And I actually just read an article today that it's been 8 straight weeks of oil rig. So what a metric that the U.S. will look at, just how the shale industry is doing, is just the number of rig counts that exist in the United States. We've seen like 8 weeks consecutive decline of rigs. So companies like Shell or other really small industry players are just deciding to not drill, fundamentally because it's not economic to get it out. But then it's just also easier to turn it off right now.
Right. And that comes down to the fact that the oil industry in the United States is more privatized by smaller companies, correct?
I would say in the shale industry, it absolutely is. I think in Permian, and you'd have to check this number, but it's like in the order of like 200 operators in that space, because it's relatively cheap to go off the market, pick up a drilling rig, drill, secure a lease, drill, and then get your barrels to market. Like in the Gulf of Mexico in the United States, like you need millions and millions of dollars to go into that investment.
Yeah.
And so just the price of entry in shales is so much lower. And so you'll see just significantly more operators in this space.
Right. Okay. So in well, across the world, we've seen oil production has been cut pretty dramatically, primarily by the OPEC countries. I think north of 10 million barrels a day. It's been cut. Have we seen significant cuts in the shale industry or the US oil industry as well?
I think on the shale bit, yes. There's a lot of operators have just stopped producing. It's actually the same thing that I was saying around drilling rigs. If you're seeing 8 weeks of consecutive dropping of drilling rigs, you're seeing consecutive then a number of operators stopping producing. And at one point, actually, so the regulatory authority in Texas that does that kind of just oversees all of the industry, it's something called the Texas Railroad Commission. Don't ask about the name; it doesn't really jive. But at one point they were sort of like getting a number of operators together around, well, should we look at whether or not our privatized industry should cut production. Fundamentally, that just doesn't work in a capital market like the United States.
Yeah, right.
Like people don't want to do that, and so that failed. But yes, what you're seeing is that companies individually are taking choices on shutting in production.
Right. Okay. I know I'm asking you to pull figures out of nowhere, but do you have any idea in terms of millions of barrels or percentage cuts?
I think I read, no, I mean, I read an article this morning actually that IHS Markit is predicting like 14 million barrel cut in Q2. That is partly shales.
Right.
I think the Houston Chronicle today quoted that it was something in the order of like 600 million barrels or 600,000 barrels a day
right.
from Permian, from West Texas.
Okay, wow.
But you need to check those figures.
Yeah. All right. And on West Texas, there was a day in April where prices went negative for a little bit.
Yeah.
Can you explain how that happened? And is this an unprecedented thing, or is this something that may happen again? Or
I would definitely say that them going negative was unprecedented. The market had never seen that before. But actually what was really interesting, and actually I even learned a lot during that time because no one had really seen this. I actually remember calling Gretchen and saying the price is negative $38 a barrel. Right? She was yeah, so I mean, what ended up happening in April is so the price marker that West Texas actually prices to is something called West Texas Intermediate. And if you're a trader and you're trying to trade barrels of oil, what you'll do is you could then actually have a futures contract. So you commit to actually get a barrel of oil, like a physical barrel of oil, for this contract at a certain date. At the end of April, a bunch of those futures contracts were expiring. And what ended up happening was, because there was such an oversupply of oil and gas in the US, just stockpiles were completely full. Refineries had full tanks. Tankers were full, our strategic reserves in the United States were full. And so if you had a contract, basically what was going to happen was you're going to have to take a physical barrel of oil. But if you have no place to put that physical barrel of oil, you don't want that contract. So what was happening is that people were just trying to get rid of the contract. And how you get out of it is just by selling it. But when everyone was flooding the market of selling these contracts because they had no physical location to actually put that, what ended up happening is that the price went negative, and that people were actually paying people to take this contract so that they could actually take the physical product. I like to joke though that like if you were an empty tanker in the port of Houston that day, man, you probably made a lot of money because you were like getting all these contracts and then could take all this physical product and
Yeah.
probably made a lot of money that day. So
Yeah.
that's what happened.
So what was the general vibe around, I guess, the office? Have people been a little bit spooked since it?
No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, in Shell, people aren't spooked, mainly just because we take longer term strategic views of things. I'm sure that if you were an operator that, really just sells off the market or just uses a trading house, that probably wasn't a fun day. But I mean, I think people were just shocked. I mean, I think the sentiment locally was that like, does this really happen? It went negative. And I think but I think what it really tells you is like how much human activity affects oil and gas demand, right? When you lock down the whole world and no one's traveling and no one's shipping and businesses aren't operating, like this is the impact that you kind of see on the global oil and gas demand cycle. It's pretty wild, yeah. So.
And then that was, I guess, the pressure was put on a little bit more due to the oil war between Saudi Arabia and Russia. Has that affected the industry still, or rather, has it affected Shell in any way?
Yeah, I mean that I kind of remember actually that week when that happened. Like that happened on a Monday, and then I think we shut our offices on Friday, and so it was kind of noise in the broader scheme of things.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, again, Shell takes really long-term strategic views, and so while the dispute that happened between Russia and Saudi caused price fluctuation, Shell specifically, I mean the market reacted to it, but Shell specifically takes much longer strategic views on things, and so it was kind of just another blip in what happens overall. Yeah, so didn't really affect us significantly. But I think a few others it did.
And now these long-term strategic views of Shell, could you go into a little bit more detail about what Shell has done so far in response to COVID and the reduction in oil demand?
Yeah, I mean it's no kind of secret that it's hit our financials a lot. It's hit all of us, actually, all major players pretty significantly. Early in April, we sort of came out to the market and said that we were going to be cutting capital expenditure by $9 billion annually. We were also going to cut our operational expenses by $3 to $4 billion. And then at the end of April, when we actually announced results, we announced that we were cutting our dividend by roughly 2/3. I think it was the first time that we've done that since World War II, so not insignificant. So I think what we're seeing right now is, as a response to COVID and just the lower demand, some very short-term responses and just protecting our balance sheet. Yeah, I would say that's kind of the big ones.
Okay, and what was the sort of like the reason behind cutting dividends? Is that just to have a larger sort of access to liquidity, or is it for some other reason that I can't think of?
Yeah, no, I mean it's sort of exactly that, but it's also just protecting our investments. When Shell produce, Shell will perform operations and then produce cash. And that cash kind of goes into three different buckets. One, it goes into paying the dividend back to our shareholders. It also goes into paying down debt. And then the third one is around reinvesting into our company for growth in the future in order to kind of do those three things. We had a choice. We had a choice on what we wanted to do with the dividend, because I think our company was like one of the highest payers per share of a percentage of dividend. And that burden to pay was roughly $15 billion. By cutting it by 2/3, we only then have to pay out $5 billion to our shareholders. So we really had a choice on taking more debt or cutting the dividend. And to protect the long-term investment in the long-term company, fundamentally we chose to cut the dividend simply because that $10 billion doesn't really exist based on our cash flow that's coming in, but to also make sure that we didn't take out more debt and that we could continue investing in things in the company.
Right, okay. And has there been any new investments or I guess new areas that Shell has been looking into investing into in terms of energy technologies or alternative solutions?
Yeah, I mean, probably not specifically like one within the last few months, just given the market. But, you know, and I would just say actually cutting the dividend was not taken lightly at all. It was a really hard decision that I think this company took. But I think, again, you know, Shell looks at things, and particularly we have kind of three key strategic pillars that we go after. One is around a world-class investment case. So just protecting the investment that we have, making sure that we're actually, you know, providing returns to our shareholders. The second one is just a world-class investment, or is a societal license to operate, protecting our site, you know, what we're trying to do in our communities. So being a good neighbor, protecting the safety and the reliability of our operations. A great example of that actually is, you know, our chemicals business manufactures isopropyl alcohol, which is instrumental in hand sanitizer. We actually ended up, you know, stopping all production for anything that wasn't hand sanitizer for a few months in March, solely because we knew that that's the right thing to do. That's, you know, this is us supporting the governments in the communities that we operate in. And the third one is actually thriving through the energy transition. And it's fundamentally because Shell sees the energy transition happening. It's happening today. And we want to be a part of that. Like, we want to actually be the future of energy, not just an oil and gas producer, right? And so we've committed to spend $1 to $2 billion investing in new energies every year, and we haven't turned that off. We're continuing to do that. And even in mid-April, you might have even seen, although the media has been just everything COVID, but in mid-April, we came out actually, and we're the first energy company, an oil and gas company, to be net carbon neutral, a net zero ambition that we've set out for 2050. And, you know, Total quickly followed us. I think they came out a few weeks after us to say that we're also going to be net zero. But I think it just shows the longer term look that this company takes in what they're actually doing.
Right. And what was the real driving force behind announcing that target?
Yeah, I mean, I think one, it was just because we believe that that's what is needed. I think that there's, you know, a growing sentiment of just, you know, society that they want more and cleaner energy sources, right? And so part of that is us just being lockstep in partnership with what our customers and society expects of us. But also we saw ourselves in a way of being a leader in this space. We're really hoping that by us doing that and by us stepping out and setting these very ambitious targets, that others do the same. And it propels the industry in a way that's faster than just letting kind of government or regulation kind of mandate it.
And now your second pillar was to thrive through the energy transition. Do you believe that, in your opinion, COVID has either positively or negatively impacted this energy transition, at least for Shell? Is it putting the right amount of pressure on, or is it really delaying what you can invest?
No, because I mean, we haven't changed our investment levels in our new energies business. So yeah, so I don't think from our perspective it's not, but that being said, if I look at the grand scheme of new energies, do I worry of other people turning off investment in those areas? Perhaps, yeah. And so, you know, I do think though that this, I think though, what I've really recognized about COVID and what I've really appreciated about COVID is the recognition of what human activity does with climate change, right? There's all these reports that you see about, air pollution going down by no one moving, and you start to recognize like, okay, this is actually human driven. And so I actually hope that what comes out of this is that there is a deeper understanding of the choices that everyone takes and a better appreciation for how that looks, and that it pushes the transition in a way that is a lot more impactful.
Yeah. I guess it also falls back onto, I think all industries now are seeing the positive impacts of, I guess, less consumption, which is not exactly what industries want to see. But it could be an important, I guess, eye-opener as to what things can look like in the future.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, even with the lower consumption, Shell knows that there's still going to be a need for oil and gas products. In the future, it's in your cell phone, it's in solar panels. It creates like plastics that make things more energy efficient. So I think there's just an appreciation that is needed on that, and we absolutely see that. But we also see us as the most responsible operator in that space. So will there be a reduction in consumption? Maybe. Longer term, I don't think we really see that. But I do think that there's just a deeper appreciation of like, oh, this is me moving around all the time creates air pollution. Is there a cleaner way to do that? Could I push that in a way that's better? So.
And now everyone wants to know what the US government is doing at all times. It's spicier than ever. What has either state or federal government done so far, either in regards to the reduction in oil demand or what was going on between, I guess, OPEC and Russia?
Yeah. Hard question. I don't think anyone really knows, quite frankly. I mean, and I think there's been conversations at the federal level on whether or not there's a need for bailouts of the shale industry or whatever that looks like. We don't really push either way, one way or the other, fundamentally. We want to stay lockstep in partnership with the government, but we won't try and sway them either way. And then, I think the whole Saudi and Russia thing, because we don't see that impacting us significantly, we don't actually really play into what that is. So, kind of a non-answer for you, Alex.
That's all right.
A bit of what I'm trying to go for. So.
I understand. That's all right. So you've been working at Shell for how long is it now? 5 years?
I've been actually with Shell with 8 years, so I've been in the industry for 11.
Oh, okay. I think most of the people who will be watching this will be considering working for companies like Shell or maybe your competitors. But why would you specifically recommend Shell as a place to work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes into actually a lot of what I've already said. One is just that I think that our 3 pillars and the purpose that our company has of providing more and cleaner energy solutions to the world just really resonates with me. It gives me a sense of purpose and it matches my purpose. And then I think the other thing that I would just say too around just energy companies in general is that, we're often talking about good new talent coming into this industry. And there's this sort of dichotomy of like, the younger generation wants to go and work for Google or tech or go and do other things. But we need that talent actually here, right? Energy is not going anywhere. We will need energy for decades. That energy might look different. And so what I would say is just, Shell has such a forward-leaning purpose that I just think look for a company that has that really forward-looking purpose, and then come in new energy, new blood in the company and change it, right? I mean, help be part of it.
Yeah, I'd also say that if you're looking into getting into tech, remember that those tech companies' biggest clients are quite often energy companies, and specifically oil and gas companies.
They are. And actually, it's really interesting. Like we do a ton of work for data centers because their data centers energies is just skyrocketing. And so we do a lot actually with those tech companies in order to say how can you switch to renewable? How can you be net zero? So yeah, exactly. Energy connects in so many different ways, and I find a lot of people don't really recognize that.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we can finish it there, Kate. Thank you very much again for agreeing to chat with me. I think it's going pretty well.
Thanks. So yeah, no, happy to do this, and I hope your club gets a lot out of this.
So I hope you found that enjoyable. It was a great experience for me, and I think she had a lot of interesting stuff to say. I'd be really interested to hear what Graham and Guillaume were going to say about it, and if they agree or disagree on any of the points that she made. But you'll have to tune in on Friday to hear that, and go to the Facebook or the Instagram or our website, monashenergy.org, to sign up and become a member to keep on top of future events as well as any news we've got. So I'll see you guys all on Friday.